Hi, so thank you everyone for joining this brown bag session today. I'm Chad Whisford with the California Housing Partnership. I'll be co-moderating this with Tony, and we have an amazing group of panelists that you get to listen into today. We're in the preparation for this. I think we were all excited just to have this conversation, knowing that in 2020 and in the wake of the racial reckoning that was happening across the country, there were a lot of good intentions, there were a lot of promises made, and just as many of the barriers that have been put up that have impeded emerging BIPOC developers, all of that has happened over a long period of time. The solutions are also going to happen over a long period of time. And we need to have honest conversations about where we are, what the impacts of those commitments are, and just continue checking in order to hold each other accountable and continue marching forward toward having a more diverse, affordable housing ecosystem. So what we're gonna do today, we're gonna go through a series of Q&As, but questions that we'll answer in the group. And at the end, we'll have some time for Q&As from the audience. To kick things off, I'm going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves and we'll go around. But as we're doing that, if you can also let us know who's in the room currently, your name, your organization, whether you represent a developer, investor, lender, or something else, just so we know who's listening in. So if I can kick things off, Tony, if I can have you introduce yourself, and then if we can go around Alexis, Diep, Mike, and Roberto, alphabetical order, keep it nice and easy.
Hey everyone, Tony Quat, California Housing Partnership, and I've been working in affordable housing for a little under a decade here across a couple of the Los Angeles area nonprofits, and joined CHPC about a year ago. Why don't we start with Roberto?
Yeah, hey folks, Roberto Garcia Ceballos. I'm with Fideicomiso Comunitario Tierra Libre. I'm a co-director there, and I've been working in housing justice for like over 10 years now. And yeah, great to be here.
Hi, I'm Alexis Lang with Lang Companies. I was just doing the math, worked in affordable housing development for about 18 years. I think I was one of the few people who knew I wanted to do development in high school. So I specifically went to USC because I had a program. And about a year ago, I started my own development company with some other former coworkers to have a bit more say in the types of developments that we're building and that we're a part of. So we're doing consulting and development now.
Thanks, Alexis. Debbie?
Thanks, Chad. Hi, everyone. I'm Debbie Chen. I'm the Director of Real Estate Development at Little Tokyo Service Center. We are a 43-year-old community development corporation and social service provider. I've been here about 5 years, but really started out in the community planning and organizing department at San Francisco's Chinatown CDC. And then after that, working as an affordable housing project manager at Asian CDC in Boston. And here I am a decade later. And I'll pass it off to Mike.
Awesome. Thank you, Debbie. My name is Mike Miller, founder of Bold Communities, 501c3 nonprofit affordable housing developer. I founded the entity in 2021. Prior to that, I had worked with Thomas Safran and Associates for about 4 years. And before that, I was working on Wall Street in investment banking. My introduction to the space is a little unique. When I was working back in New York, we covered real estate investment trusts, and I developed an interest in development. And when I was at business school at UCLA, I met the guys at TSA, really liked the team, and never really thought affordable. But then, I liked the folks. It was a unique animal, learned it. And honestly, I never thought I'd be sitting here talking to you guys today about starting my own affordable development company. I think traditionally, as Chad pointed out, the barriers are extremely high, and I learned that pretty quickly when I was working in the space. But with the passage of the introduction to the BIPOC pool by SIDLAC and TCAC, who I really commend for that, they lowered those barriers pretty substantially. But there's a lot of work to be done, and hopefully you guys, find this call helpful, just hearing our different journeys. So thanks for having me.
So we have a lot of experience here, a great amount of diversity and experience here as well. So I'll jump right into the first question. What challenges or barriers have your organizations encountered while trying to access resources made available to yourselves as BIPOC led or emerging developers in recent years?
Yeah, I could start. So yeah, I work at a community land trust. So for folks that don't know that, what a community land trust is it's just one way of preserving and stewarding land in a way that creates perpetual affordability by separating the land and the housing or the structures above it. It's a really rare model. And so actually community land trusts are, started through the civil rights movement, specifically for Black sharecroppers to have access to land and wealth. And through time, it's turned into a really important tool in communities of color. And so in my journey towards this is that I was actually an organizer for an affordable housing developer, worked on a lot of equitable development campaigns, and realized that affordable housing took us so far in terms of how community residents engaged on a day-to-day basis with their affordable housing developer and the housing. And so even in the affordable housing developer decided to build a community land trust. And we're like 4 years old. And I think one of the main things that we've encountered with other community land trusts is a lack of responsive financial tools, because we're on the ground and we're working with community residents, and there isn't financial tools that we have that could be deployed immediately for us to acquire a building or to acquire land and preserve land, so it doesn't turn into luxury housing that displaces the community. Another is a need for policy change to facilitate and support the work that we have. We don't have specific laws that help tenants figure out how to buy their building or how to buy the land, or how do residents how do we facilitate a process through policies that actually grants the community the first right to buy public land or have access to public land. And then operating costs, as a community land trust, there's very little investment in community ownership in our neighborhoods. I think affordable housing developers also see that as well, in terms of having to consistently build, because we constantly need developer fees to keep our doors open. But how do we also create investment in the type of infrastructure that we want? Funding for and specifically funding for property acquisitions and the ongoing stewardship of the land and the housing that we have. And so those are kind of the barriers that we see, and I think they're really tied to structural racism, because our community land trusts are also operating and live in communities that have been historically disenfranchised, redlined, and then and now we have these new investments coming in that are threatening the livelihood of people, because that represents rent increases. It represents not having even access to new supermarkets that are could potentially come in, or even just for us, there's just that constant threat of displacement. And while years back it was a constant threat of not getting any investment, but now that we're getting investment, it's the wrong type of investment. And so that, those are some of the barriers that at least as a community land trust we're seeing here.
Yeah, I'll just piggyback on that. Roberto brings up some, it's a lot of the same challenges. It's really, I think what's unique with, and only because I know Alexis probably the best on this call, and I know she's in a similar situation. She's running for profit. I'm running a nonprofit. I think we really fit that bucket of emerging developer. We stepped away from, established groups we started our own companies, and we are on this process of not only are you building a company, but you're also, participating in partnering in development. So there's two buckets there of capital where I've seen challenges. One is working capital, which, I think it's understood that there always need to be a little bit of working capital to get going. And I'll elaborate on this in a second. And then two, it's the guarantee piece. When you get a deal moving, and you're taking out pre-development loans, or you need a LIHTC equity investor and a lender, they all have their requirements, liquidity and net worth, guarantees. I mean, that's where the rubber meets the road. So when it comes to a point, you're like, hey, I got a great deal, I need a pre-development loan. And then the answer is like, okay, great. All right, what's your guarantee source? My guarantee source, let me go talk to this person over here, this partner. And then that dovetails into a conversation of, okay, well, how much are they going to charge me to do, to leverage that source and whatnot? Folks on the call may be aware of programs that are out there for BIPOC developers or emerging developers. In my experience, my anecdotal experience, I can't speak to all developers on this, those don't really come as advertised. They're very fragmented. There's bells and whistles. They say, hey, we can do this piece, but not the other piece. And honestly, it kind of just gets to a point where it's not even worth exploring those. And I just got to go get a deal and find a partner where I can make it work. And because I'm running a business and these developments are long cash flow cycles, I got to get that moving. And luckily, I've been able to find partners to do that with up to this point. But what I love about this call is this is supposed to be, a frank discussion. And frankly, those are the things that are happening. Those are the challenges. The other thing I'll add, and Roberto touched on this, is policy. In affordable housing development, kind of that last funding source is tax credits and bonds, right? They're competitive. It's been talked about for a long time, the alignment of regulations. That really couldn't be more poignant than right now. I think particularly with the BIPOC pool, we know how competitive bond cap and credits are. I don't know what other pool out there can you have more certainty that you can get a deal funded than with the BIPOC pool, purely by the nature of how few BIPOC developers there are in the affordable housing space with the risk appetite that want to go start their own developments. Not a lot. There's not a lot. So, I think it's in every jurisdiction, local, state, TCAC, obviously they have the regs to really align so that, you can get a deal funded and you can get housing in your community quicker, as quickly as possible. And I try and make efforts to comment on local regs, but I'll give you an example. There was a deal in LA County where I was like, oh my gosh, this could be great. I could take it to the BIPOC pool. It's high resource. And then I realized, I looked at the regs. It's like, oh, I don't have max experience points. So that's not happening. I'm not going to score well there. So I put that aside. So I think that's where, and I think these discussions are great. I hope you guys have more of them. A lot of local agencies and leaders and whatnot can listen into these, hear from other BIPOCs, understand, hey, these are the true challenges we're facing, not what some DEI officer is saying in some corporate ivory tower, who may or may not be plugged in with what, oftentimes I find is not plugged in. And then the last thing I'll say is we need transparency. TCAC and SIDLAC do a fantastic job of transparency. I can look at their scoring, all of us can look at their scoring and plan a business around that. I was frankly a little disappointed with the Supernova. I'm hoping they put out more data because I really want to know, especially as an emerging developer in that pool, which was the spirit of those regs were, in my mind, supposed to align with the BIPOC as best they could. Who won in that pool? Who were the emerging developers? I want to know who my peers are. I would like to meet them. I would like to see how they won, how they competed. I'll just be, very transparent. Alexis and I were partnering on a deal with another partner, all emerging developer group, 120-point high resource area project. That's a shoo-in in my mind. That is a shoo-in project to win, and it didn't. And so I think, we really we need transparency from agencies, particularly one like HCD that has so much funding available, which we all need to lean on to get these projects moving forward. So I just use those as some examples, and those are some tangible challenges that I've seen and faced in my journey so far.
I guess I would say I agree with what Mike and Roberto said. And I would also add that a lot of the programs that people have created or different banks and things have created are the same conditions that you'd have to have if you'd been a long-term developer. So they're not as helpful. So, you can have a fund for emerging developers, but if you require the company to be in existence for 3 years and have 3 years of audited statements, like that limits the groups that could actually apply for the funding. But enterprise, and there are other groups as well that are also underwriting the developer, not necessarily the company. And I think that's helpful. So as people are looking at as banks and investors and cities and states are looking at the programs that they create, they should really look to see like, how does that limit or expand the pool of people who'll be able to reach out to those funding sources.
Yeah, thank you all for bringing all this up. What I hear as a common theme is really flexibility and how there's a set of guidelines out there that often in many cases have been in effect for a while. And even though there's an intent to expand access, we don't see flexibility on increasing the gate or the door for folks to enter in any practical way. I'm wondering, we've heard HCD brought up with the supernova, we've heard references to nonprofit funders and other agencies. If there are any areas that you're looking where you are seeing flexible guidelines or flexible help in terms of accessing resources, even if it's not perfect, just guideposts that may be helpful to pull from.
Yeah, I mean, this is low. It's not like a lot of funding, but at least the LACLT coalition, which is made up of 5 community-led, BIPOC-led community land trusts, have worked with the County of LA on a community land trust CLT pilot program, where the community land trust created the guideline, like worked with the county to create the guidelines and the grant agreement. In that grant agreement, there was a lot of flexibility, and we had the privilege to work with Little Tokyo Service Center, specifically around like us being a very emergent community land trust where we're only 4 years old. And our first kind of year of operating was the first year of the pandemic. There was flexibility to work with Little Tokyo Service Center to build collaboration and kind of use their experience as a placeholder for growth for the organization. And so in a lot of ways, like that sort of design process and that sort of application process was, I think, very innovating, and that we haven't really seen a lot of working with public agencies or even with like philanthropy or like the private sector and how they release funds. And I think in a lot of ways, like several organizations across the state are now working with philanthropy in creating a community land trust pool fund, where we're going to actually be part of the design process of how the funding is going to be used and designed. And so in a lot of ways, like I do really appreciate that kind of flexibility that some folks are working towards, and specifically affordable housing developers that are looking, and I'll let Debbie talk about this, but are working at really kind of investing in the infrastructure of communities of color that are surrounding, like for example, Little Tokyo. And so Boyle Heights is actually a neighboring community to Little Tokyo, and there's like historical like references of how Japanese and Mexican American communities have worked together and immigrant communities have worked together. And so I think it's like building on that legacy.
Thank you for bringing this up, Roberto. I think it's a great direction to go in, and just posing it to the group to talk more about experiences with partnership, whether experiences partnering with experienced developers or partnering with emerging developers in the case of LTSC, and what that has been like, the positives as well as the difficulties there. And if there's anything organizations looking to work with BIPOC and emerging developers can do better.
Thank you, Roberto and Chad. And, I think I'll just pick up where Roberto left off. LTSC and Fideicomiso have partnered to co-acquire some property. And, our plan in the near future is to do a split of the land from the improvements, and we'll have the community land trusts own the improvements and the land, and the improvements. We're working toward a conversion into a limited equity cooperative, which would be owned collectively by the tenants or the residents. And LTSC's model actually is CLTs are new, they're different, but for really the last couple of decades now, LTSC has built about 1,000 units of affordable housing. And the way we've gone about it, for the most part, is going across the city of Los Angeles. We partner with other community-based local organizations, particularly in neighborhoods of color, to develop projects, community assets, affordable housing, whatever it is that folks need or would like to see. And I think we've done close to 20 partnerships at this point, and I would say inherent in our mission is a desire to want to uplift other BIPOC communities across Los Angeles. And I think we really see this as collective work. That capacity building, that technical assistance is inherent in our mission. So for us, it's a lot of emphasis on collaboration, but structurally speaking, there are so many ways that the policy space, that the funding guidelines, and even perhaps new programs that could be created outside of the existing structure. There's so many ways we can do better. I want to pick up on what Mike was saying about a guarantee pool. Doing lots of partnerships is, or any partnership, one partnership is challenging. You do have to realize that you're taking on a good amount of risk, especially that early pre-development risk. And what are ways that we can better mitigate that? It really is in the guarantees. If there were some way that we can say, hey, in the event something goes bad, there's this fund, and it's everybody out there, philanthropy, others have pooled their resources to create this fund, and it'll be there as a backstop in case things go wrong. We can go so much further and do so much more in terms of our partnerships. So I'll pause there.
Yeah, I think that's well said, Debbie. I just want to add two things just to circle back. Chad, you'd asked about some organizations that I've seen that have been flexible and have had a chance to interact pretty closely with. One is Nonprofit Finance Fund. They don't have a huge real estate footprint, but they had like a small slug of capital that was like really patient, low cost loan capital. I wasn't able to take advantage of it at the time. It was sort of ring fenced to South LA. And then CSH has an initiative called the Race Initiative, and they truly have grant capital. It's funny, the concept of grant capital, I read about it and I feel like when I talk to folks, it just would just disappear in the wind. But they have it, and they're offering it to folks as part of that Race Initiative. And I think that's fantastic, and that flexibility. And I really cannot stress enough how important capital is. It's very, 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 very important, particularly patient capital. When you're dealing with emerging developers. I mean, technical assistance, of course, is helpful. I think technical assistance is needed perhaps for folks, not to say, I definitely don't know everything. This stuff takes a village. I'm leaning on my network of consultants and, other developers and whatnot in my projects. But, technical assistance to me is more kind of for the person that doesn't really, they're newer to the industry. But I think when you're talking to an emerging developer, you should be talking about capital and creative ways to help them there. What's interesting about partnerships, here's what my experience has been on that. The certain folks are fine. I think if for those that I don't know who on this call is familiar with the BIPOC regs, but basically how it works is if you are to partner the BIPOC and you have max experience points, you can't go in the BIPOC pool, but you can get a slightly increased fee up to 20% developer fee upfront increase from 15 to 20%, and then your upfront is increased from 2.5 million to 3 million, plus the 20K per unit over 100. I've talked to some folks, they go, you're crazy. There's no way I'm giving you a guarantee on that under those terms. There's no way. I don't know what TCAC was thinking. That's a terrible, terrible deal. Okay. Then there's others that they say, okay, we can make that happen. We want to invest in DEI. We understand sort of that we have to, if the mission is DEI and supporting BIPOCs, emerging developers, under everything under the sun there, under that umbrella, we have to give up a little bit to bring people to an equal level. That's what that means. It's like the social impact investor that wants market rate returns. That's not social impact. So I think, that's what the experience has been. So there's sort of two sides to it. One thing I would say as an emerging developer is I understand the financial risks of guarantees. I definitely am sensitive to that. I will also say this, just for folks maybe to think of it from another perspective. We're literally starting our own businesses. I don't know how much more skin you can have in the game than that. So I would just, to keep that in mind, even as I'm having some initial development fees coming in, I'm not making a windfall of money. I'm building up a balance sheet so I can go off and develop and provide my own guarantees. And I think the quicker folks can kind of get aligned and say, hey, I understand what we're trying to do here. We're trying to, get to an equitable position, create some equity here. Those emerging developers can get to that place where they can support the guarantees and they can help pull up those other emerging developers. So I think I know that's a mission for Bold. I want to get my balance sheet to where I can provide the guarantees and liquidity and net worth requirements and truly help other emergings. So they don't need to be having this conversation, the frank conversations. And I understand it's going to take some time. And I think we made some great progress, but that's what it's been so far.
So, I mean, we touched on it a little bit, but so why isn't the presence of a BIPOC pool or an emerging developer set aside enough in our current public funding, in TCAC and HD? Like, why isn't that enough? What else can we do to better support emerging developers or BIPOC-led organizations?
Yeah, I mean, I could talk about the LACLT coalition, and there's 5 community land trusts right now. There's like 2 or 3 that are cooking up. Shout outs to like Long Beach folks who are doing that work, and Chinatown CLT folks that are building up their CLT as well. But I think for us, we spent a lot of time during the pandemic really thinking about how do we build something more than just a coalition, and how do we actually build regional infrastructure, knowing that as emerging CLTs, and we have 2 CLTs that are I think over 15 years old and are still considered emergent, just because of how hard it is. And if it wasn't for their work, some of us wouldn't be here either. So that's like Beverly Vermont Community Land Trust and Trust South LA. And so for us, I think it's like instead of thinking solely in our CLTs, I think we're really thinking about what does regional infrastructure look like, and so how do we share asset management, how do we share our real estate development capacities, so that like how do we hire BIPOC affordable housing developers that are burnt out to come work for us in a way that they facilitate real estate development deals for us as 5 CLTs, not as 1 CLT. And how do we share those resources, right, to kind of make sure that we build infrastructure, and at the same time, like how do we advocate for policy and change policy? And so United House LA has been a really cool thing that's happening in LA. And part of ULA has an acquisition fund, and it also promotes this like social housing. And so for us, it's like how do we use this policy to build infrastructure, to build co-ops, to like do the training and capacity building, so that when we acquire buildings, there's like a better facilitation of making sure that tenants get to that goal of owning their own building. And so for us, like, I think that's the expansive kind of thinking that we're having, where and I think it's a lot of lessons learned where we've actually, like, some of us have worked in affordable housing with affordable housing developers, and we've seen how competitive it is and how hard we go, and how sometimes we're competing over the same resources. And so for us, it's like, how do we have more transparency around what we're trying to do in our local communities, and also and uplift each other versus kind of fight over the same resources. And so that's why one of the big things that we did was this pilot program, where when we got the $14 million, the 5 CLTs decided collectively what buildings we were going to acquire, what regions we're going to get more buildings. And it was a really difficult task, but it's possible. It's possible for us to be like collaborate and make those decisions together. And so, yeah, I think those are just examples of what we've done collectively here in LA.
And I think those are great things that you guys are working on together. I think part of the reason the current regs aren't enough is that they're new. So it takes time to do new construction, new development. So it's not just because like CIDLAC created a pool that means that everyone who may be interested in the program can apply right now. You have to find a site, you have to make sure it's entitled, or you're buying someone else's site and making sure you have the right partners. And I think that some ways that some funding could make it slightly easier, like, well, why not provide additional funding on the 9% pool as well? So if experienced developers are partnering with a new emerging developer, the overall developer fee is higher. Like, we found that we're talking with other experienced developers who, like, we can do the work. And I think we're finding is a lot of developers, like, people are tired at other companies. And so like, look, they may not have staff that's currently trained. Like, in exchange for partnering with us, like, we're training your staff to make sure that they know how to do developments going forward, which works for 4% projects, but it doesn't really work for a 9% project that would be faster. So, as we're looking for ways to make it easier for other emerging developers and just like improve the overall ecosystem of affordable housing in the first place, is like finding other opportunities to make it a win-win for everyone. And I will say, it was our main, we're looking to do developments, and we've had some partnerships that are in the process. We're waiting to hear back on funding sources across the state. But in the meantime, we're also just consulting for developers who need help and stuff. And I think that's very valuable. But beyond just getting like the consulting fee that any consultant gets, if the funding sources made it more like financially feasible or attractive for larger developers, they would probably be partnering with some more emerging developers as well in the meantime.
Yeah, I want to emphasize that point. Like, so I think that's a great one. And it feels to me that would, I think that would be a pretty easy change. And what I mean by that is, for example, maybe instead of $3 million for the upfront fee, if you partner with a BIPOC, maybe it's $5 million. So that way, that same max experienced developer would get the $2.5 million up front that they otherwise would have gotten if they had done the deal on their own. So just some simple math there, where it is one way to solve the equation. I mean, the funding, the funds are there for it. Oftentimes that's just deferred anyhow. But I think that's kind of a simple solution. And Roberto, I loved kind of what you brought up about this idea, not idea, it's a reality. And it's one thing sort of that I've kind of picked up on too, is this like 10-year emerging developer. That's crazy. That is wild. And I think to your point about shared resources, like, yeah, what incentives are there? Look, I'm gonna have to be partnering for a while. Okay. That's not lost on me. But I think in the process though, folks that do truly want to help and maybe help set up a guarantee pool or whatever it may be, we partner together. Both emergings, we lean on that guarantee pool. Those dollars are now stretched further for a project. And, perhaps there's an increased developer fee up front. We're better capitalized. We can go off, do more. Capital is flexibility. That's what that is. Capital is flexibility. And I know I just sound like a broken record over here, but I truly cannot stress that enough. We have technical assistance, everybody. There's plenty of technical assistance. We need capital. Folks may not want to say it as bluntly as I am, but I truly, truly, truly want to stress that. Like, we're at that point. There's plenty of dollars out there. There's plenty of dollars to put to work. Even if I'm not benefiting from them, please let some other emerging developer benefit. And I want to hear their story and how they were able to take advantage of that. So I appreciate the technical assistance. We don't need it. The emerging developers, we have the network. We know who to go to. We know who to go to when we need help. So, but yeah, those are my thoughts on that.
Mike, I'm going to jump in really quick because I look at Roberto, I look at Debbie, I look at Alexis, I look at you, and I'm not looking at a screen of people who just woke up yesterday and stepped into affordable housing land. You've all worked in affordable housing before. Some of you have been in affordable housing longer than I've been here. Where I wonder, like, as you're approaching partnerships or you're approaching funding agencies, as you're getting questioned up and down about the viability of your organizations and projects, you know, emerging developer becomes a handy umbrella, but it reflects some reality, but doesn't completely reflect the experience all of you have. And I'm wondering if you see that being valued and uplifted and invested in, because the reality is a lot of organizations statewide, given the depth of our affordable housing crisis, given how taxing the work is that we all do, there's a lot of staff burnout. And what you all represent, you represent a good partner, but also a lot of experience that is filling in the gap for potential partners.
Yeah, I just want to say, just so I don't lose this thought, Alexis touched on this. She does a lot of consulting work. I do some consulting work. I think folks need to remember, again, when you're starting a business, somebody had made a comment to me, I forget when, but they said, why don't you hire more people? It's not that simple. It's really not. Like, cash is king when you're running a business. You've got to make sure you have enough liquidity to sustain your business or you're not going to be in business, period. So you do things like you consult. I think when you consult, what you get with, and this is no knock on, I was a PM. I have so much respect for PMs. PMs in this industry, they're so overworked. They have so much on their plate. They're underpaid. I was an investment banking analyst, okay? And I'm comparing that to the PMs in affordable housing. It's right there. It's neck and neck in my mind. And what you get with a group like us, like you said, Chad, like we have so much incentive, not only just to, we're like, hey, you put a project in front of us, we're gonna get that thing done. And we're gonna put you in the best chance, give you the best chance to win, I promise you. The number of iterations all of us have ran in our head of how to structure different deals is an infinitum, I would imagine. And so I think in that you get a super motivated kind of like PM on just, PM on steroids, for lack of a better term. And meanwhile, they're training your staff. A lot of these staff, like, they appreciate it. I know some of the groups that I've worked with, like, it's been really fortunate to be able to train them and see how they succeed and have the confidence to say, oh, I remember when I was in your seat and I dealt with that, and here's how I navigated that, and here's some things that you can do. And it really sort of, the sum is greater than the parts, and it's a really neat partnership. And I hope, the last thing I'll just say on this is, there's only so much time in the day. As much as I would love to be looking at all these programs and commenting on policy, I need to develop. I need to get deals done. I need to get a fee. I have to get this business going. And it's hard, that's why I appreciate this platform. It's hard it can take a lot of time doing that, a lot of time. And so you got to be really diligent with your time and your management. But, hopefully a platform like this, to your question, Chad, that's where folks can learn that you're right. We're not just emerging, whatever that means to folks. Like, we are folks that we're emerging in the sense that, yeah, we're principals in the deals, but we've been doing this for folks for a long time. And, those folks are successful and they're, running great companies. So.
And I just want to add to that, I think that a lot of us have been doing the affordable housing work the way, the system has set up the affordable housing work to be done. And, as this ecosystem of BIPOC-led, and I want to add community-led developers continues to grow. It's still nascent, but, as it continues to grow, it doesn't have to be business as usual. We don't necessarily have to subscribe. Look at how Roberto and the CLT Coalition is doing their work collectively and jointly. I think that if there are ways that we can continue to uplift partnerships among each other, and we can make, funding recommendations within the LIHTC system. Hey, raise that developer fee limit in the event of joint venture partnerships between, BIPOC developers or, with BIPOC developers, in the deal, but, looking again, at the guarantee pool and looking at ways we can inject more flexible working capital into, these particular types of structures by BIPOC developers. Hey, it's not just about set asides anymore. You got to prioritize. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's like, I think, it's I haven't interacted enough with Alexis and Mike and Chad and Tony, but I feel like it's a small community of BIPOC people just like really committed to solving the housing crisis and solving structural like injustice. And a lot of us are here because our own families are impacted by this and our own communities, and we live in it, and so I think for me, it like if there's philanthropy, if there's foundations in this room, I'd say like invest. Like you just heard it from us. It takes 15 years or more to be taken out of the emerging label. And so don't give us a 1-year grant. Give us a 10-year grant. Give us a 5-year grant that really will invest in making sure we hire and take care of the folks that are really committed to this work. And then if you're a financial institution, give us flexible, low cost and patient tailored like capital. And think of like the impacts of what we're trying to like challenge. We're challenging like structural racism. And if you come to us with a high interest loan with good intention, it's not going to work. It's going to take 20 years to get us out of this emerging status and a lot of burnout. And then if you're a public sector employee or elected official, I'd say like work with us in making sure that we set up the guidelines for the investment that's going to come into our communities, and recognize that emerging BIPOC CLTs and other affordable housing developers have a lot of investment and a lot of experience in making sure we set up policy so that it gets deployed in the way that it needs to be set up urgently. And so I think for me, like those are the 3 things that I want to make sure I communicate to folks in the room.
One thing that I would add though, along those lines is also like we are considered emerging or other groups, but also it isn't necessarily lived experiences. I think lots of people have like great ideas about what can happen in a community, but having someone who like looks like the residents or from those communities, I think helps, because there's like certain things that a general project manager would know. Like you may need to have like a place for people to leave shoes by the front door, depending on like what neighborhood you're in, or a place to like, put your purse down. Like, these are small things that you can't learn on the job. It's just like you would know by who you are. And I think having more diverse leaders in the industry will help with that. And that's part of the reason that, Mike and I've created our own companies and working with Debbie and Roberto, like they're just like, if you look at the landscape of who the typical like leaders of the organizations who are in the various communities, they don't tend to look like the communities. And I think that can, like, it's great that housing is getting built, but it isn't necessarily getting built to like meet the needs of a community. And like, I don't have to be from a specific community to have certain ties or certain like understandings just because of who I am. And like, that is valuable. And I think that helps with projects. So like, as you're looking at like considering us to be emerging developers, like it's not just the development experience, it's like the lived experience that makes better projects as well.
Yeah, I think, there's an ethos and there's like a sensitivity there that, and a trust, a little bit more of a trust than there otherwise would be with someone that maybe doesn't reflect the community that you're going into. We still got to execute. That's not lost on us by any means. But I think it's a really good point, Alexis and Roberto. Roberto, I echo everything you just said, by the way.
It's great. I think everyone here touched really on, work within the community and working within the context of the community, and how supporting BIPOC-led or emerging developers can really work to integrate, affordable housing into this and create more opportunities, while also being mindful of what's already built there, and not forgetting or not pushing out the cultures and communities that are already in place. And that was actually one of our next questions, so that's great. But I would actually like to ask all of you, what advice would you give to anyone starting out in their affordable housing careers that are looking to pursue similar paths, trying to potentially break out on their own, push forward as emerging developers or as BIPOC-led organizations?
You got to think through like how your first couple of years will work out. Like, I was able to leave when I was able to leave because I saved money during COVID. Like, I knew I wanted to have a company, but I thought it'd be like years down the road. But I literally, because of COVID, I was not going anywhere, and I was like, let me try it, stay at home. Like, how can I like plan to like cover my, not just my general health insurance, my company insurance, and all of those things. And I was like, oh, we'll figure out projects along the way, but at least I have like a cushion to hold back on. And not everyone's going to have that. And I mean, it could be bigger, but it could be worse. But I think the other thing is also like making sure that you're making good connections, like the work that you're doing now. Like when I left and people knew that I was leaving, I'm consulting with a few firms now, but other people also approached me. And I have another partner who's like working with me full time as well. Like, because of our experience and our good name, like people want to work with us. So I think that helps, like, in just knowing who people can reach out to. So as you're thinking about leaving, like making sure, like this, just in general, also like save your contacts. Like make sure you download all your Outlook contacts so you can call people later or have that information. Like small things that some people may forget, but like just like doing good work and like understanding the programs and knowing who you need to talk to, like, or understanding like how regs are being set up, I think will be helpful. Like it's one thing that I wish I'd done more of prior to leaving. Like I was able to leave because the BIPOC category was created, and I realized that other people were doing other things that would make it like advantageous for me to do it now versus later in my life. But it would have been great to like be a part of like how the regs were set up in the first place. Like for instance, like the BIPOC category is lovely, love it, but there is one issue with it is that you can be a BIPOC organization who doesn't have California experience, like anywhere in the country, and you can qualify in the BIPOC category. And that needs, like that loophole needs to be changed. And just like things like that, like it would be good. I think the city of LA had some programming for their managed pipeline, but if a group gets extra points for partnering with an emerging developer or BIPOC, but then because you're partnering with them, you don't qualify for the BIPOC category, like things like that. Trying to be involved with how the regs are being set up and making sure you understand like how, like where the regs are coming from and how you may be able to like work within them or without them in the future.
Yeah, I'll say, you got to have the technical capacity. You got to know what you're doing. I have met some folks who want to jump in, go off on their own, and they don't quite understand this crazy world that we're in that is developing, and that takes some time. So you got to have that. To Alexis's point, it's going to take longer than you think it's going to take. So just give yourself a runway. Cash is king. Can't stress that enough. You need liquidity, however that may come. So if that's saving your money, or you have some other source, or there's maybe something you can do while you're building the business, consulting work. To Alexis's point, make sure you keep those networks strong, do good work for people. And I just say, go for it. Just go for it. Like you can do it. You really, really can. Like trust me, if I can do it, you can definitely do it. Okay. So that should give you solace in and of itself. And it's amazing. You'll see what you're capable of when you go out on your own. It's pretty unreal. It's pretty unreal what you can achieve. And so I'd say go for it. Have conviction. Don't listen to the naysayers. A lot of people that are naysayers, don't listen to them. They don't matter. And I'd say go for it. And if you need some advice or help, please reach out to me. I'm happy to be a resource.
Yeah, I mean, my perspective is a little different. Like our community land trust was incubated at an affordable housing developer, and because of COVID and extraordinary, or I don't know if they're extraordinary financial reasons, we had to leave our incubator prematurely. And so we had $5,000 in hand and a box of documents that were filled of the work we had done while we were in incubation. And we were set free as a established community land trust. And what I'd say is that like a lot of the work that we did was really community driven, and it's an organization that is run by the community. And so when we were established, we had a very strong board and a lot of members in our organization, and they said, pick up the stuff, move it into your house, and we'll figure it out. And so I didn't have income for like 6 months, to be honest. Luckily it was the pandemic and there was like, federal money coming into my pocket. And then from there, like, I think what we had done well, and I think for me, the partnerships are really important. And so among the 5 CLTs, we fundraised money together. And it was what really helped us kind of turn on our organization in a way that I would have never imagined. And it really kind of had a mix of people who were in the game for many years and folks who were new and were establishing something new. And so for me, I think it's like trust that there's other BIPOC folks or just allies that are really committed to the work that we're doing, that there are folks invested in what we're doing, and don't be afraid to reach out. Don't be afraid to collaborate. And don't be afraid to make mistakes. And I think in the process of the work that we've been doing among 5 CLTs and the partnerships with like Little Tokyo Service Center or Billion Corners or Venice Community Housing, like we've all made mistakes, but we're willing to come back and look at them and learn in terms of what we're trying to improve or how we're trying to grow. And so I think for like, I completely agree with everyone saying, and then also like things might not, develop the way you hope for, but there's a lot of folks that are willing to collaborate and support. And so that's why you should just jump into it, because there is a safety net of affordable housing developers and community residents and other community-based organizations that really believe in what we're doing, and we'll jump in when we ask for support.
I just want to say it's such an exciting time right now. LTSC has been, partnering and supporting other BIPOC community organizations for, a little while, but, and again, with the creation of the BIPOC fund and, the creation of certain set-asides in some of our traditional funding sources, I think that's kind of been a spark. I'm really excited to see, this cohort grow, and, we're always open and to continue to partner with other organizations that are looking to do this good work. And we want to see, everyone else, including this group here, be able to do the same, bring someone else along. And, we hope the funding guidelines will continue to support partnerships like ours. And I would just say, don't underestimate, any one individual's talent, because you are talent in this industry. And there's some new players coming to town, and, there's options where there weren't before.
Thank you. I think those were amazing responses all across the board. One thing that came up in that chat that I've been chewing on as well is, as you're navigating philanthropy, as you're navigating local funding, statewide funding, how has your experience been with the alignment of roles and requirements, even definitions as to what an emerging or BIPOC developer is, and if you think there is alignment between those spaces, or if there needs to be increased alignment?
Sorry, alignment with what, Chad?
In terms of definitions for emerging developer or BIPOC developer, and in terms of qualifying, just qualifications.
Got it. I'll just go quickly. There's not an alignment. The alignment with BIPOC and emerging is somewhat aligned, but it's not as aligned as it could and frankly should be. In my opinion. I think I'll give you a good example. If there was a BIPOC project that if the BIPOC concept was in the supernova, I would imagine you would have a supernova funded project in round one right now. I'm not sure that there is. I'd have to go back and double check, but I'm pretty sure there's not. So yeah, so Alexis, yeah, you can confirm. So like there's I think we missed the mark on that. We missed the mark. There's a project now that's just waiting, and people aren't, I guess it's not like I guess the majority of those funds are being used, but in any event, that was an opportunity that was missed. And like I was saying at the beginning of the call, you can't guarantee anything in this industry, but again, with that BIPOC pool, pretty certain, you can get pretty certain with folks that know what they're doing. And yeah, that's where I've seen some misalignment. And in terms of the local regs, some of them, they don't tie with TCAC and they don't have that alignment. Some of them may be working on it. Some of them may not even be aware that there's a difference. I may not be aware of the BIPOC pool. So hopefully some of those folks are on this call, and when I have some time, I'll write my comments to various organizations and jurisdictions that I'm in. Maybe with the help of SCAMF and CHPC, we can get those comments across as well. So
I think one thing I would add too is so we set up our company it's a for-profit, and a lot of the grants, things that are available are only available to nonprofits. But setting up a nonprofit Mike did it, but in general, it's not that easy. You have to have a board, you need board insurance, you need all those things beyond just I'd buy general development insurance, like workers' comp, all these other things, which make it hard. So it's not that I don't know what I'm doing, but it's because I don't have a nonprofit. I don't qualify for certain funding sources. But we're still doing the same work with the same mission. It's just the structure of how the company was set up makes it a little bit difficult. And yeah, I think some of the regs aren't necessarily aligned with how things will work. And it's speaking also local sources. So even if they do give additional funding for partnering with emerging or BIPOC groups or extra points, but the developer fee is still lower than what it would be if you have the CDLAC or TCAC deadlines or TCAC requirements. So it's yes, extra point, but it's not really incentivizing or helping other developers want to partner with new and emerging developers in that space. So really looking for cities and local groups to look to see how that funding comes through. And same thing with some of the state programs that they have, we applied for some excess state sites. That would be great sites to apply for the next round of the supernova, but the state won't have the RFP for the sites in time to apply for next year. But I think that's kind of an issue around the structural of how funding comes together for projects in general, but it specifically becomes an issue for emerging developers, because that means if we do sign an agreement with a city or entity, it's going to take 2 or 3 years just because of how they decide to release the sites and the RFP process around those sites. So as groups, if cities and think this is important, really taking a hard look to see how it affects the different cycles for all of the funding within a project. Vouchers, for example, in different cities, municipalities, all of that comes into account, which is, I think, a general, just affordable housing issue to begin with, but it becomes a bigger issue for emerging developers who don't necessarily have the extra money to give you a $50,000 deposit and not be able to apply for funding for another 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, and sorry, Roberto and Debbie, I'll jump in here. I just don't want to lose this. The developer fee point is a really good point at the local level. I totally overlooked the fact that a lot of the times they can be more restrictive, and you're just subject to that restriction on the upfront piece. So revisiting that, I think, is really important. Just align it with the max available. It's better for everybody to get housing. If the goal here, why we're all here, is to build housing, let's streamline it. I don't think that's lost on anybody on this call, but I really do want to emphasize that point. And then to Alexis's point as well about, again, with this alignment, if it caught those initial dollars when you're starting a company are very, very, they're a very scarce resource. So there's not a ton of flexibility to just be okay, I'm going to throw this app in and I can just apply next year. No, that's a strain. It can be a strain. So those are why, I think kind of lack of transparency can make it really challenging and determining, okay, am I going to go after this deal? I'm pretty sure it'll win, but I don't have all the data. So we need data. We need the data. It's there. I know it's there. There's a lot of apps that are submitted, in all these funding pools. So I really, 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 really encourage anybody that has like a public funding process to publish your data. It's better for everybody.
Thank you, everyone. At this time, we'll start going through some of the questions that have come through the Q&A and through the chat from the attendees. And so I'll throw out this one from Ismar. Aside from experience, partnerships, and jurisdictions to ensure BIPOC development works, how do you fold in sustainability and equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging? What is most important to you all?
That they all kind of go together. Sustainability at ADI and B, I'm not exactly sure what that stands for, but I think just in general, I think sustainability is a thing. We're in California, like it's going to happen. Like there's other rules around like sustainability requirements and things like that. But by partnering with emerging developers, like there's certain, it's just going to happen. I don't think that you necessarily have to worry about that as like a specific thing that happens with a BIPOC developer or an emerging developer or who you're partnering with, because it's going to happen. It may come in different ways. So the emerging developer can talk with people in the community and maybe realize like we don't really need a garden. We need I don't even know, like a place for people to fix their bikes. Like that's more important to the community. And because in general, like lower income communities, like bicycling and like using them, like that was not just a fun thing to do. A lot of people, like that's how they were getting to work and on buses and other things, like those types of things that other people wouldn't necessarily know of. But by partnering with someone who's like from a similar community or the community members feel comfortable talking to, like those are things that you can learn, which helps with sustainability and other things in an area just by virtue of who you're partnering with. And I mean, in the bicycle things, it's literally something that happened. Like we don't want a community garden. We want a place like fix our bikes, like, which is also cheaper in the long run and easier to maintain. Just like things like that you wouldn't necessarily know unless you're partnering with someone who the community feels comfortable talking to.
Yeah, I could talk on that. I mean, I think community land trusts are specifically meant to make sure that belonging is like really emphasized. And so I think like even if you look at our board structure, 1/3 is like members of so you have to be a member of a community land trust. And so those guidelines are set when you're forming a community land trust. And so members have board representation, tenants of the land have 1/3 of the representation, and then 1/3 is actually left for allies or supporters of the community land trust. And the board, at least the way Fideicomiso works, does a really good job in terms of consulting membership and looking at conditions in the neighborhood to really kind of set up with staff what makes up kind of our priorities and our work plan and strategic planning for the organization. And so I think for us, it's really important to make sure that our developments are aligned in terms of making sure that there is community engagement in every process, and specifically that there's like like community-led efforts. And so for us, like we're currently, like when we first started and the pandemic was happening, like we were only doing like COVID response work. So we were like making sure people had food, we were making sure people had money, we were trying to find grants to make sure people could feed themselves or have a little bit of savings. And as that kind of emerged, like we also started seeing like buildings just being sold like crazy. And I remember having conversations with Debbie and being like, yo, you should just come walk my neighborhood because these buildings are being flipped while we're supposed to be in home, like inside our homes. Like, how is that possible?
We made 3 offers before, we stuck one because, we would attempt to make a call or submit an LOI. And before we knew it, we found out the property was already in escrow. It was just happening so fast. And I think, to Roberto's point, just, too often in low-income BIPOC communities of color, development isn't, happening with that accountability and responsiveness to the residents that are in the area. And, development is just such place-based work. And I think, like a thesis here is, accountability is what, we want to see, and to the residents, to the area. And that's what ensures that the values of the residents and the community, whether that's sustainability, inclusion, belonging, all of the above, get realized in whatever development happens.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think, yeah, I would say that, I think one of the main things that we're trying to bridge is that historically, like any type of development, whether it's affordable or any changes in the community, like there's no real information. Like they don't teach us in school how affordable housing is developed. And so like, how the hell would anyone know that an affordable housing development is happening in your neighborhood and where that funding came from and what capital stacking looks like? And so for us, it's really important that folks who are doing like tenant organizing today, and that we also collaborate with another community-based organization that's doing tenant organizing, is building tenant associations. And for us, it's really important that the demand for community control of buildings, of land and housing is part of the demand of a tenant union, of a tenant association, and that we work collaboratively with our members and our organizers and our developers to make sure that we create a tool that could be implemented the same way we go to the bank and get a loan, or the same way we go get groceries. Like we should know in our neighborhood how the hell to acquire a piece of land to build a garden, or how to build a building, or how to create a co-op. And so for us, like the engagement and the organizing is really to make sure that we democratize like development in our communities. And that is a really important thing because communities of color have been left out of that really core information, and that really core kind of capacity and muscle that's needed to make sure that we fix these like structural injustices that exist in our community.
Thanks for those responses. I'll make another plug. If anyone in the audience does have a question, please send it through the Q&A rather than the chat. So just help streamline seeing it, and that way we don't have to scroll up all the way. One question that did come through earlier was, has climate change has or will have an effect on where and how you can build? And if so, what can it mean for communities of color? And to piggyback off of it, I'm sure we're all aware of the fact that communities of color are often disproportionately impacted by environmental injustice, and whether it's climate change or decades of environmental injustice, I would say it's nothing new in terms of what our communities have to bear.
Can you repeat the question portion of that? Like, I mean, I understand what you're saying at the end was very true, but I didn't catch the question part.
Has climate change has or will have an effect on where and how you can build? And if so, what can it mean for communities of color?
Well, I mean, I think it does have an effect on where things are building, like it's a floodplain or other things. Like you're not going to be able to get insurance, or developers, like you're not going to be able to build in certain areas. But like, as you said before, like unfortunately, like a lot of places where like community of colors have been like led to live are already in issues that have environmental issues, or will continue to if they're near the dump or if they're near the industrial areas. And I think that is something that needs to come, that people need to consider as they're looking at how other developments are being built or in the future.
Yeah, I would just add, you know, it's something that's top of mind. I mean, environmental safety, as much as we can control it and have a highly, you know, a quality building and location, and make sure that all the proper tests are done and whatnot, to make sure that, you know, the communities that we go into and we build in are, you know, not impacted from a negative standpoint. I mean, that's of utmost priority and focus, of course. Yeah.
And
can also add like,
go ahead.
Sorry, I was saying, like, the last CIDLAC meeting, one of the developers talked about how they Vanessa Delgado, I think it was partnering with a group, and they were trying to clean up a site that had said it was clean, and it ultimately wasn't clean. And like that affects like how projects are being built. So like having, I guess, flexibility and understanding, like it may take longer to get projects built in certain areas, and it may cost more per unit because there are issues like with the development to begin with. Like it's much easier to build out where it's a nice green field where nothing had ever been before. But if you're building on like a former, I think hers was like a former like unregulated gas station, like, but we need to like clean up the water table. We need to clean up the land in that area, because not just for the residents who live above it, but for the general communities as well. Like I think there's an issue in the city of LA with some lead poisoning in some communities of color. I saw an LA Times article the other day about that. And like that costs money, but like we owe it to make sure that we're like, while cost per unit is important, but also like overall like fairness and equity, like making sure that you aren't saying that we're not going to build in a certain area just because it's more expensive, when it helps not just those residents, but the community in general to clean up the soil and the other things that are going around, and like providing like a place for a community center or like a bodega, a grocery store, like other things that people are looking to do like on a smaller scale that aren't happening in certain communities, because like while there's an open lot, like the lot's contaminated. So we need to make sure there's sources to make sure those sites get cleaned up.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that like to Alexis's point, you know, neighborhoods didn't choose for, you know, 7 freeways to crisscross through the community, or, you know, for a jail to, you know, be located or built next door, or right in the middle, in some cases. And there was a lot of lack of choice in what was developed in communities of color. And, you know, that doesn't mean that communities don't deserve now to have nice community facilities, to have affordable housing, to have the assets that they'd like to see get built or preserved in the vicinity. So, you know, I think, you know, looking to the future, you know, there's much to be said about environmental resilience and, you know, resilience to climate change, and, you know, adapting our buildings so they will last us through whatever is to come. But just, you know, first you got to look back and take note of, you know, what's there now and what had happened before. I think that a lot of, you know, banks and funders and lenders, generally speaking, you know, do get very conservative about environmental issues. But, you know, what are you going to do? It's the city of LA. Yes, there's contaminated groundwater, but, you know, don't I deserve to build in my neighborhood? And how do you work and negotiate that?
Tony, you're on
mute.
mute.
Tony.
You're muted.
Sorry, just clicking the wrong window if I was holding space. Roberto, I think this is mainly directed towards you, but Debbie, I think you could help fill in here too. Are CLTs able to leverage shared resources or grant opportunities to take advantage of banks dumping real estate debt from their portfolios?
Let me know who's dumping, who's getting rid of land or housing. Yeah, we're actually, it's not bank related, but we're actually working on a CLT pilot program with Chapter A properties, where we're gonna, we wish not to get any of these properties. Like, we want to make sure people preserve their homes. But if the county or the state forecloses on a Chapter 8 property, at least in Supervisor District 1 with Hilda Solis, we're working to make sure that those properties go into a community land trust. And we set up a different ownership structure where it maintains an affordable rate in case those, and we want to make sure that no one gets displaced. So we're working with the county to make sure that folks who are living there, whether they're the former homeowners, whether they're tenants, that they're able to stay, and we set up a structure for them to own the property, but then also make sure that it stays permanently affordable forever. So I think in a lot of ways, like, we want to make sure we implement those type of programs. And so we're piloting it. We currently have a pilot program with the county for unincorporated East LA and some of the other unincorporated areas. But if banks want to pilot that with us, we're more than happy. And I would be really, I worked in the foreclosure crisis in Western Massachusetts, and there are ways to make sure that people stay in their homes and are able to keep their homes. And so for us, yes, like, we're open to that, and we're currently have a pilot program with the county.
Thanks, Roberto. One last question that came in through the Q&A that I think may be applicable to everyone is, what is some advice you would give young or emerging BIPOC folks getting into affordable housing, and how to deal with lack of representation or tokenization of our communities? Advice for your younger self.
I forgot who said, it's like, go where you're celebrated, not where you're just like there to be the face of things. And if you're going to be the face of things, make sure they pay you for it. Is like an easier thing to say. But I would say, like, really, like, looking at where you're working and who you're working with. Like, I stayed at Bridge Housing for a long time because I really enjoyed the people that I worked with for a very long time. I worked with at other companies where I had a great time working with those people, and I moved on for like other ways to like help me in my career. And I still keep in touch with people from like previous jobs from 10 years plus, because it's like people you want to work with. And like, and it, I don't know, and I guess it's like, it's easy for some people to say that, but also, like, I understand that there's like you can't necessarily take the best job for that you think you're going to want, because you have to pay your bills. Like, being realistic about like where you're working and how that affects like your ability to do things going forward. And I'd say, like, I mean, I guess, like, I knew I wanted affordable housing development in 8th grade, because I just didn't think it was fair how projects were being built in South Dallas, and I grew up in the suburbs of North Dallas. Like, that's like kind of a unique experience from other people. But like, as you're figuring out like what you're interested in, like, talk to people, because I think emerging like BIPOC developer or not, like, people are really eager to talk to you about what they're doing, and you can decide if you want to do that. Like, maybe you don't want to do development anymore. Like, you want to do financing, and in financing, you don't want to do the underwriting. You want to be the relationship manager, or you want to work for a grant organization. Like, just talking to people and like figuring out what you like. Like, I thought I wanted to be an architect, but I like ultimately, like, I like the design, how things get built, but it's more about like the whole structure. Like, I like the development side of like, I don't have to know everything. I just need to know a little bit about a lot. So like, figuring out like what you want to do, I think, is very important. And so yeah, I think that's what I would say. Just like, I mean, I've had a great time. I don't regret any of the jobs I've taken in the past. Don't regret leaving and start out on my own and working with the people that I'm working with now. And I feel like a lot of the work that we're finding now and people we're partnering with now are because of our relationships in the past, because they know that we do good work. And then, you know, we're good people to like work with, because it's not just like necessarily, some people can do the job, but if they're a miserable person to be around, they're not going to want that. And if you don't want to be that miserable person because you feel like tokenized or other stuff, like realize and like recognize your worth and go somewhere else. Because like, as we talked about, like there's a lot of housing that needs to be built, and there are a lot of organizations that are out there. So if the one that's you're with right now is not the one that's going to be there long-term, like go out and look. Like there's happy hours, there's other events to see other people in the industry and find other ways of being working in affordable housing, if that's what you want to do.
Yeah, I don't know who asked that question, but I would say if you're not working at a place right now, to Alexis's point, like go, you know, you can start to work with an affordable developer, go get an internship. Trust me, they can use interns. And, you know, that's one way to kind of get a pulse on how an organization works. I think that's kind of how I started. I think I started with like a brief internship, and then I liked the folks I was working with. And what also, I did not know this at the time, and I think this will be helpful, but just understand there's a lot of tangential organizations to development. CHPC is a good example. You know, the CDFIs, the LIHTC equity investors. I think that's a really interesting space. The lenders, you know, there's lenders that become developers, and developers that go work as equity syndicators, and all of the above. And I think Alexis brings up a great point. Like, just follow your gut, work with good people. If you don't like them, move on. You know, life's too short, and go for it. And I think just immerse yourself, really learn, and follow that curiosity, and good things will come of it. And I guess the other thing I want to say too is just, you know, reach out to people, talk, like Alexa was saying, talk to anybody. Don't be afraid to cold call. Nobody's going to be mad if you sent them an email or called them. If they are, you don't want to talk to that person. But most people, they want to field your call. I mean, what's interesting about when I was kind of getting Bold off the ground is a lot of this came to fruition in a big way just through some cold calls I had. And I met some really great people that were really generous with advice and some guidance. And there's folks that really do want to help. So yeah, so don't be afraid to do that. Don't be afraid to do that. And to Roberto's point, don't be afraid to make a mistake. Here's what I can guarantee you: you're going to make a mistake. It's not a big deal. You make it, you learn on, you move on, and there you go.
Yeah, a lot of us are here today because someone took the time to help us out, or field a question, or you know, even something as simple as passing on another contact. Like there is a network here. There is a growing ecosystem here, and you know, I think to a certain extent, you know, we do owe it to HCD and TCAC to, you know, start their emerging BIPOC and community set-asides. But you know, it's really it's begetting this entire chain reaction, and there are, to Mike's point, these really exciting, you know, bold, brave CDFIs out there that are also trying to do this great work. There are foundations out there that are also, you know, really, you know, saying, hey, I want to invest in those who are willing to invest in these low income and BIPOC communities. And I think that you never know, you know, someone is going to lead you somewhere else, and there's a whole world of options.
Yeah, I agree with everyone. And I'd say just don't be afraid to volunteer or get active in an organization or a group that you really admire, or that you want to be doing that work. And you know, the way I got started was the foreclosure crisis was happening. There was an eviction defense campaign happening at the moment, and I spent a year just door knocking before I worked for this organization. And I had a job. And so it's like, it's just things like that. Or like, if there's a book you read or report you read, look at who wrote it and write them an email, find who has their contact, because they're not too far away from you. And that's how I've met a lot of my mentors and a lot of the people who have taken the time to give me some sort of advice on how to accomplish the things I've accomplished. So yeah, and what everyone else said.
Thanks. I'll add to my own personal too. One is to have a group chat. So as helpful as it is to have mentors, have the people you can reach out to when you have a bad day, when you have a question. But at least in the past, I've been too embarrassed to ask supervisors about. It's nice to journey with people. We all go further along than if we journey by ourselves. And the second is don't compare yourself to anyone. Look to your left, to your right, everyone's on their own individual journeys. And I think as much as I believe Roberto, Debbie, Alexis, and Mike are gonna do great, amazing things, I also like uplift just like their uniqueness and the unique journeys they'll be on, and how solving this affordable housing crisis, just how they manifest solutions for that. And I believe everyone in this room right now has different ways and different solutions that we can all live out and bring to the field that benefits all of us as a group. So believe in yourself and live into that, and yeah, just take it step by step.
And I want to re-echo that group chat is very important, because things will happen and you want to have someone that you can reach out to, or multiple people that you can reach out to. But making sure like you're talking with people in other organizations, and I talk to people in other states as well that I've met over the years. Like something happens on the news, something happens, like you just need to get it out. And like you have your general friends and family, but they don't necessarily understand the industry. So if you can say something that happened specifically and like talk it out with them, I think it's very helpful as you would build different types of community.
Yeah, I agree with everything that everyone said here. I think, it's really important, like others have mentioned, to really work and go after things that you're passionate about. And really don't take for granted learning, because I think a big part of my professional career path is going after things that keep me interested and make me want to figure out more, learn more about it, and it keeps me excited about everything. And I think that can get hard with the burnout and the overwork and everything, but kind of also taking a step back and looking at the entire picture and how you're affecting things. I mean, I started off working with people doing leasing and occupancy and moving people into apartments and giving them the keys to their units. So there's a lot of good that you're doing with the work that you're doing, and not forgetting that as well. Because I think when you're just looking at Excel sheets or you're just looking at funding sources, I think these things can you can get a little detached from it. And so taking a step back every once in a while and appreciating the good that you've done is really helpful.
Yeah, and I just want to echo great points, Chad. I think it's a great point you made on not worrying about other people. Your journey is unique. Keep your blinders on, keep moving. We are in a crisis. There's just tailwinds in this industry. So there's plenty of deals. There's going to be more capital coming to space. I'm confident that there will be. And so it's a really good time, I think, to be in the sector.
Checking the time in, we've just about come to the end, but thank you, Tony, Roberto, Debbie, Alexis, Mike, just for a great brown bag session. And I hope and believe that this is the first of many, and that we'll continue this conversation, because it's one that doesn't end after one event, and we need to continue having it. But thank you to everyone who joined today. And if you want to reach out to any of us afterward, please feel free to do so. I know we're all willing to continue this conversation. Jeanette, is there anything you'd like to add from this campsite?
No, we'll send out a recording to everybody later today. And thank you so much to CHPC for hosting this conversation and all of our panels today. It was a really great conversation. So with that, goodbye, everyone.